So we're beginning a three-part series that we'll do this week, next week, and the following week, hence three. Would have been four, but Edwin Gaines is coming the week after that. On my book, Sacred Thinking, just in terms of looking at the major concepts of how we look at, well, reality and life and possibility in our teaching. And the first part of the book is divided into three parts, and the first part is about understanding spirit, understanding the nature of spirit or the nature of God. And we would begin with the idea of, what word do we use, or what word should we use, or whatever the case may be. And the answer is, it really doesn't matter what word you use. That in the history of humankind, wherever there's been a culture that's had one or more deities, and most of the human cultures have had one or more deities, there's one thing that you can say is always true, and that is the deity as understood by the culture is a projection of the people in the culture of what a deity ought to be. And usually that deity is designed to exemplify or enforce some kind of an idealized way of living, what is considered right, let's say. So in some cultures there are very loving deities, or there are multiple deities. One is kind of the enforcer, and another one's kind of the lover, and another one's about this, and another one's about that. In others, where you have so-called monotheism, one CEO kind of runs the whole show. But even within monotheism, say in Christianity, where you have the saints, where you can pray to a specific saint for a specific thing, they're kind of like middle management, in a sense. And so you know who to go, you know which office to go to, and if they consider your request worthy, they take it up the line to the VPs, which is, Mary and folks like that, and then you get kicked into the executive suite where Jesus and God the Father live. But there's still that kind of a concept of sort of breaking up the idea so you can have a specific awareness to approach. In fact, what we call pagan religions that have multiple deities really always have an overarching, one single overseeing God, like Zeus in the Greek pantheon as an example. So today, if you were to take 500, let's say a room with 500 Catholics in it, a room with 500 Buddhists in it, a room with 500 Muslims in it, and you were to go to each of those rooms and ask for a definition of the deity, you would get 500 different answers in every room. Now, those answers might sort of conform to the teaching in which they adhere, in terms of what words to use and phrases to use and things like that. But each individual would actually have their own idea, their own sense of what the deity is. Just the way it works. So within our teaching, within the metaphysical realm, the question is, how do we see the deity? How do we see God? We usually use the terms God or spirit or creative intelligence of the universe or love. If you look in the Science of Mind textbook in the back, there are some symbols, circular symbols that kind of list a lot of the words that we use. And the point is, it really doesn't matter what word you use. A lot of people come in, I get people say, I've really got a negative kind of a sense, a little reaction to a word like God, because my upbringing caused me to have that. And say, well, use another word. Steve. Steve's right there. Or Louisa. It doesn't matter. The point is, because we begin with the idea that spirit, I'll use the term spirit, that spirit is an infinite. Infinite. That's a big idea. It's the biggest idea you could possibly have. In fact, it seems that a human mind cannot really grasp what an infinite is, because an infinite is so big. The way it was described to me one time in a science class, an astronomy class in college, was because they were describing the universe as infinite. And they said an infinite would be if you took a container the size of the Milky Way galaxy, which I can't imagine either, and you dip that amount out of the universe would still be full. And in fact, what you dipped out would still be within the infinite. Because you can't have an infinite and something. So there can only be one infinite. If there's two, then you got two finites. Make sense? Okay. Let's continue. This, by the way, is the cover art that we used in my book. We just used a section of it. And that's done by Bob Luckin, one of our ministers, who also did the wall art on the side walls. And he did that when my daughter Caitlin was killed. He drew that for her. That's done with pen and ink. Pretty amazing. So Dr. Holmes says in the textbook, the world is saturated with divinity, immersed in reality, and filled with possibility. We must take this divine possibility and mold it into present actuality in everyday experience. This is the way to freedom, the pathway to peace and happiness. So our view of spirit is not of a being or anything with a personality. It is the totality of everything. And the way we relate to it, which is really what all religion is about, is how to relate to the deity as it's defined. And the way we relate to the deity as we define it is to go within and connect, recognizing that our mind is the vehicle through which spirit expresses as us. So what that means is that everything that exists in the universe is contained within the bigger idea of spirit. And we would say evolution is the device by which spirit expands its expression in the physical universe. That everything evolves. There's a great little video. I'm going to put it up on our Facebook page and probably on our website. I just found it today online. It's the whole history of the universe, past, present, and future in 2 minutes. So, it doesn't take a lot of time. Because to watch it at real time would take forever. So, more than forever, right? Yeah. So it begins with a big bang, and it goes through, a whole bunch of and it's probably, there's probably, my guess would be 2,500 to 3,000 images in that 2 minutes. So you might have to watch it more than once to see if you can find yourself. But it goes through, and then right near, kind of 3/4 of the way through, human beings appear, and it goes through kind of a whole bunch of pictures and everything. But it's very interesting to recognize that all that is really one thing unfolding. That the physical universe, as we understand it in the metaphysical realm, is simply an outpicturing of an idea in the mind of God. And that idea came into form, became actualized from potential to actualization through that thought. And that since we are part of that process, we have to be like that. You cannot be alien to that which created you. Does that make sense? So we actualize our life experience by means of our thought. That our thoughts that become beliefs on the subconscious level then become the filtering system, or actually the internal law by which we realize and understand and interpret our experience. And that's the whole thing that's going on. And your individual experience is up to you, and the collective experience you experience is up to any group that's part of that collective. So we're not independent actors. We are interdependent actors, yet only you have dominion over your own experience. Not everything that happens, but how you respond and interpret to everything that happens. Kabir, who was one of the Sufi ecstatic poets who lived in India around the 1300s, said, "Behold but one in all things. It is the second that leads you astray." When we start dividing up reality, we start dividing up the idea of God. We start seeing ourselves as separate. How best to describe this? As religion has evolved, even though some religions don't believe in evolution, they evolve. As religion has evolved, the way, and people, religions evolve because we evolve culturally and we evolve individually. We see the world differently. We have different information now than they had when the Bible was written down. We have a different understanding of reality than they had at those times. And the Old Testament stories, some of the earliest Old Testament stories, come from before there was writing. And people looked around and tried to understand reality based on what they knew, which wasn't much. And the projection out of that became the deity. Well, God must be like this. In the Old Testament, scholars say there's at least 14 versions of God. Based upon who, there's like 4 in the first 2 chapters of Genesis. The first God mentioned, Elohim, that moved upon the waters and said, "Let there be light." Elohim is a plural. That in that story, there was a belief in polytheism. Go figure. And Yahweh comes along, and Yahweh is a projection of a patriarchal culture that didn't like women. Matter of fact, was just kind of grumpy about everything. So Yahweh's a punishing God. Yahweh puts you through trials. Yahweh makes you suffer because that's what life was like then. And if even the good people suffer, it must be ordained by God. You see? So it made sense to think that way. But as things evolve and things evolve and things evolve, we begin to be able to project a higher order of divinity. But the secret here is it's always about us. God is everything. God is the infinite. So anything you say about it's true, but it's not all of the truth. We'll never have all of the truth. But I think it's important to get the biggest idea you can, rather than a small idea. And you might as well recognize it's going to be your idea anyway. So maybe you use the outer guidelines or the outer definitions as guidelines, but you're going to come up with your own anyway. You might as well do it consciously and intelligently. As we've evolved, and there's a wonderful book called Integral Spirituality by Ken Wilber that talks about this process, that basically the Western religions stopped the approved evolution of their idea of the deity about 1,000 years ago. And the deity at that time was a pretty magical, mythical thing. It was a thing to be feared and to be adored. It was a thing that might answer your prayers and might not. It was a thing that might answer your prayers but make you suffer a little first. Kind of a feline approach, The cat plays with its food and then eats it. There was a God that could scorch the earth and kill children. So you got to jump through a few hoops for a God like that. In fact, you can get the idea that if I'm not suffering, I must not be living a God-like life. There was an article in the LA Times today about, they asked a bunch of, I guess they were prominent Catholics, I don't know, about what they thought the new pope should do first. And the first one said, sackcloth and ashes. The new pope should wear sackcloth and ashes for the first 90 days to atone for the sins of the church, because in order to show that you're godlike, you have to suffer. Well, that's a viewpoint. Guess what? That's a viewpoint that underlies much of Western culture. You ever known anybody, I'm sure this doesn't apply to you, but you may have known someone that if their life's going too well, they start to feel guilty. I'm not suffering enough. Because we believe in some judgment day where they're going to call you forward and say, did you suffer the way the Lord suffered? And you may say, I don't believe that, but see if you don't subconsciously sometimes. When your life starts to go into, anybody ever sabotage their life when it's going too well? And then wonder, gee, why did I do that? Well, maybe it was your indoctrination as a small child about you needed to suffer. My mom, when the movie, what was the Mel Gibson movie, The Passion, of the Christ came out, which was just atrocious, I thought. My personal opinion. But she was a devout Catholic. She had converted to Catholicism. And she was, jumped through as many of the hoops as she could. And she called me up, and she just hated gore. And she said, Jim, I feel like I should go see this movie. I said, why would you want to go see that movie? It's not, it's not exactly uplifting. She goes, well, I think I should go because Jesus suffered and I should suffer too. And I said, then have at it. Suffer away. Suffer big. If you think that's important, if at the other end of that experience you will feel better about yourself, have at it. I'm glad I don't have that problem. But see, that was a genuine idea of what she thought she should do based on her understanding of what she was taught by her church. So in defining God, and here's why I think we need to do this. You're doing it anyway, so you might as well do it in some kind of a realistic form. And B, it's important because defining God is really about how you basically fundamentally see reality. Some of the deepest beliefs in your system have to do with what kind of world this is. And if you've got Yahweh rattling around in there as your go-to deity, you're probably going to have a lot of confusion in your life because Yahweh was very confused. Couldn't find Adam and Eve hiding in the garden. Come on. Just as one example, put Lot through hell, who was a good man. You see? But if that's your deity, if you got an Old Testament punishing God in there, you're going to have to. That's going to be part of every experience you have. Where's the punishment? And when you're looking for the punishment, you're leading with fear, aren't you? And when you're leading with fear, you diminish your possibilities of expression. Very simple. So it doesn't work. So you can't help but do it. Your definition is yours alone. We don't have a definition to give you. We have some qualities that seem to be true over time, but we don't have, this is the ABCs of what God is, and you have to believe this sign at the bottom, and then you're a member. We don't do that because we recognize that wouldn't be valid. It wouldn't be an integrity. Does your definition of God or Spirit work for you? That's a good question. I don't think my mom's definition was working for her. Because what she would tend to do when she was alive, if she started to get depressed, she would just wallow in that depression because, oh good, a chance to suffer. She was looking for chances to suffer. Because she believed the more she suffered here, the more she'd be rewarded later. I don't know how it's working out for her. She hasn't told me. It should be a working definition that changes as you change. In other words, as your consciousness evolves and up levels, your definition of the deity needs to do that too. So you're always working on it. It's never finished because you're working toward an infinity, and you'll never completely describe an infinity. So those are some of the qualities of it. Questions to ask. What is my definition of God? Before you start, do you have one? You do, but are you aware of it? And this is usually a very gut level thing. If you imagine at the very bottom, if you imagine your subconscious as kind of a triangle going down, and all of your beliefs are kind of arrayed at the greater depth, the stronger the belief. And down near the bottom, there's like a toggle switch, very analog, that is either on or off. It's either I feel connected to everything or I feel separate from everything. And that deepest belief informs every belief above it. So in your knee-jerk reactions, in your reactive mechanism in your life, when things happen and you just react, do your reactions tend to come from a sense of connection or a sense of separateness? And if they come from a sense of separateness, then your current definition of God is of a distant, judging God. Probably you have an image of him looking over your shoulders and peeking under the covers. And judging, and writing everything down in a book. I was told when I was a little boy, everything's written down in a book, and when Judgment Day, it's going to read the whole book in front of everybody. What a boring day that's going to be. It's like bring your toothbrush day, right? Because you're going to be there a while. So I used to think, being not a very good little Catholic, I want to make my reading as interesting as possible. Which led to a whole series of escapades. Does my current image of God, my current idea of God have form? Is it a being with some kind of form? Is it a being in a place called heaven? Something like that. That may be problematic because it's a limited idea. It's an old idea and it's a limited idea. And by the way, I'm not telling you to change what you believe. I'm just kind of, let's open to inquiry here. Okay? Be nice if you were aware what you believe, which a lot of people aren't. What image have I given God? You know? Old white guy with long hair and a beard, kind of a Santa Claus sort of a thing. Only not always giving out presents, if you know what I mean. Judge, jury, and executioner. Is my God about being in a pitched battle with evil? A la Revelation? Is my God battling anything? And how's that working for me? How is this definition working for or against me in my life right now? How much good can I take and accept? That can be a real good barometer right there. You know, someone that says they're an atheist, they still have a definition of God. So there's no one that doesn't have some idea of a deity or something that's the ultimate reality. Let's call it that. The ultimate reality. The ultimate thing behind how everything works. And you can say it's just science. So it's just atoms out there randomly bumping into each other, and that's how we showed up. But that's still a definition of reality that will control and direct how you respond to and create in your life. Or you can have the idea of what most of us were told when we were little kids about some guy up in the sky who loved us dearly but didn't want us to have sex and didn't want us to enjoy it if we did. Who sent his only son to be sacrificed for our sins. That's the only way he could figure out to make us okay. And therefore, you are to suffer as he suffered. That's pretty predominant in our culture. Even though most people have kind of left it behind in the sense of how they behave, they haven't necessarily left it behind in how they think about themselves. You know, I've attended a number of people who were ready to pass on to the next experience, both as a cop and as a minister. Interestingly, it's a similarity in the jobs. And you'd be amazed, maybe you wouldn't, how many people were deathly afraid of passing on because they were going to be judged. Deathly afraid. I'm afraid to die because Jesus won't accept me because I've sinned. I can't tell you how many times I heard that. And then I'd go out and talk to the family, and the family say, yes, that's true. We told him that Jesus wouldn't accept him because he's a homosexual. And we pray for him every day, but we know he's condemned to hell forever. And this one example was a fellow that had been in religious science for 25 years. But on his deathbed, that was still there. And he sat up and grabbed me. He was like a skeleton at this point, dying from AIDS. He grabbed me and he said, Dr. Jim, is Jesus going to condemn me? And I said, Jesus isn't in the condemning business. Show me evidence of Jesus condemning anything. So he's certainly not going to condemn you. You're a good man. But I don't know if that worked or not. I don't know if that helped or not. So he had a definition of God, he thought, that was different than the one he left behind in his life. But when it came down to it, that old one was still the one working. And it wasn't working for him. And it can't be true. It can't be true. It doesn't make sense. We know too much. So, here's some stuff from my definition. God is all there is. That's another way of saying infinite. That everything is God. Everything, even the stuff you don't like. Hitler. If everything's divine, everything's divine. You know, in the Hopi tradition, when they have a shaman, a person who's in training to be a shaman, and shamans, by the way, it varies from in the indigenous peoples. There's various ways of selecting a shaman, but normally what happens is when you're about in middle school age, for us, a knock comes on your door or your tent flap, and the shaman's standing there saying, "Come with me." And that child is taken to be trained. And the reason the child is selected because the child has exhibited qualities that we would, in our culture, define as schizophrenia. Kind of interesting. Schizophrenics don't get cancer, by the way, which is another interesting side story. Anyway, so that child is taken and is inducted into the ways of the shamanic tradition, which usually means learning about herbal medicine, learning to do incantations, and various things like that. And in the Hopi tradition, the final exam is about a 24-hour thing that we would call a very powerful initiation. Because what the shaman has to do to be effective, and this is recognized, is be able to look at a person who is exhibiting horrible disease and see only the perfection within them and call it forth. Kind of like our practitioners. So what the Hopi shaman in training has to do is one of their last hurdles to being accepted as the shaman is they have to eat excrement from a dog and know that that's God. And if you can't do that, how can you see the perfection in a dying person? Now that's probably an exam you stay up all night thinking about, right? And one you don't cram for. But think about that. You have to transform your understanding of reality from one that rejects to one that accepts. Because that's part of the definition of God. Accepting. Never rejects. Joseph Campbell says the spiritual warrior, the ultimately realized spiritual warrior, never says no to anything, says yes to it all. Whatever shows up in front of me must be my divine intention. So I don't reject anything. I engage with whatever shows up, recognizing it's next on my divine journey. That's hard for us to do. But if we don't engage it and dominate it in a spiritual sense, then our own growth is stunted. God is all there is. No exceptions. God is cancer. God is a child molester. God is the slimy things that crawl on the ground. God is your worst enemy embodied as someone you've identified as your worst enemy. It's all or nothing, because you can't really take half of it. You can't just take the good half. That's what we've been trying to do in our culture for 2,000 years. It doesn't work. Because then we deny all the stuff we don't want to look at, and it festers, and it festers, and it festers. Need I say global warming? Or any of the other issues we refuse to look at politically because we turn away from what we don't want. No, we're supposed to engage it and bring our creative intelligence to it and transform it. In the Hopi tradition, it's believed that by eating the excrement, the excrement is transformed into gold by the power of the shaman, which is alchemy, which is the same thing that came up through the Western tradition. God is infinite. We talked about that. Everything, all-inclusive. There is no spot where God is not, is the third grade way of saying that. If that works for you, use it. God is accessed from within. We're not praying to a distant being outside of us in the sky. We're praying to ourselves to accept what is already so. We do not need to be redeemed. We need to accept what is already so. That is redemption. So when we do prayer, when a practitioner prays for you, all they're praying for they pray to themselves. They pray that they realize the goodness within you so that you might. We're not, when I do a spiritual mind treatment of affirmative prayer, whatever term you want to use, I'm not praying to anything out here or any spirit behind me. I'm praying to change my mind, because that's all that's necessary. The universe is created already. The infinite is complete. Nothing can be added to it. The only question is your good in potential or has it actualized? Everything that will ever come into your life already exists as potential. The choices you make decide what and how it's actualized. So what I am and what you are, I am that part of God or Spirit whose assignment is to live the life of Jim Lockard. And to actualize as best I can what is possible for me to actualize so that the entirety of creation is served. That's it. The law we use, the aspect of spirit we talk about as law or principle, is impersonal. It can't say no. It can't pick and choose. It responds by corresponding to the consciousness that you create. So if you create a consciousness that says life is suffering, have at it. Spirit says, right you are. It's like God assumes we know what we're doing, which may not have been too bright. No, but it is. It's the way we evolve. We evolve through challenge. We evolve through coming up against our limitations and learning to transcend them. But if we're not in a teaching that says you already have transcended them within, just realize that truth, then we start to think things are impossible. Nothing's impossible. Nothing that is in your face is impossible. It's there. The question is, have you risen within yourself to the level to meet it and to transcend it? So all the action is in here, in mind and heart. So you have a worksheet, and those that are on TV don't. But if you send an email, the email addresses are on the website. We'll send you one. You can Xerox that to make extras. You can use it. And what I recommend you do with this is on the top part, it says list the attributes of God, as many as you can. And this may change. You may cross some out and add some in later. Just make a list. And on the bottom, draw a representation of your image of God. Now, God doesn't have a form, so how do I do that? I don't know. Be creative. Something beautiful. The book is available in the bookstore. And really, in this first part, when we talk about this is so critical to a spiritual pathway, whatever religion you're in or no religion. It's so critical that you come to terms with your own definition of the reality that as you understand it, and recognize that definition will change as you change. Because at any point, no matter how evolved you become, you're only dealing with a part of the infinite. There's always more to realize. There's always a greater possibility. But if we don't do this work, we're relying on our default setting that most of us got when we were kids that may not be quite the best thing. That's all I'm saying. Thank you, and namaste.